can share when we begin to talk like this. Even for someone such as myself, I am considered to be a cisgender person, meaning that my gender identity that I express on the outside aligns with how I was created at birth, right? But just the simple way of sharing our pronouns with one another as we introduce ourselves is a way of helping people to understand that we see you, you're in a safe space, you can talk to me. It's a signal, like wearing a little pin, a rainbow flag, or the pronoun stickers that we shared out there. I'm incredibly grateful to be on this journey with all of you in a supportive place like Cathedral of Hope. I will say this is a unique opportunity for every single one of us to be our true selves, to express who we are to the world. And I don't want to take away from the folks who are here bravely standing in their own skin as their complete and total selves by taking too much time here today. I think I just echo some of the things that Miss Amanda shared with us about how important it is to be aware of what is going on in the world around us, to vote if we're able to vote. If we're not able to vote, then to encourage other people to vote, because that is also an option. To make sure that we understand where our elected officials stand on the issues, and to also attempt to move them in a better way through advocacy and by being ourselves and by showing up whenever we can. This is a long fight that so many of our trans siblings of color have started for us as the entire LGBT community. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her last name, and that's really shameful of me. Sorry, cut that from the record. When that activism began, it was out of absolute desperation and disgust with the way the police in the community were treating people in New York. And so the Stonewall, I don't call it riots, I call it activism. The Stonewall activism that began at the Stonewall Inn over 50 years ago. And we owe it to these trans people of color who started this ability for each and every single one of us who count ourselves in the queer community to stand up and be visible today and bring our true selves. And yet even elected officials who are out, LGBTQ people, if that is something that interests you, I'd like to talk to you after this session, because I do serve in a political sense, and I'm connected to a nonpartisan political organization that helps train people who would like to become elected leaders, from city council all the way up to senator, if that is your choice. I was very, very privileged as a young person to work when I was 16 alongside someone who was undergoing transition. And so even this proper little cisgender kid, because I was very immature at the time, was fortunately and synchronistically, I guess, creator put people in my path when I was really young, so that I would be able to accept what happened later in life. This server at a pizza inn was somebody who trained me on how to be a good server, and she was extraordinary. And I had no clue that this was not a woman until people who worked with us pulled me aside and said, "You better be careful." And I was like, "Why? I don't calling her terrible things when they came in to order pizza. And I thought, how incredibly cruel is that, and purposefully cruel, to treat someone with disrespect just because they are presenting, and very happily presenting who they are, right? So at 16, in the back of my mind, a young activist was born to stand up for people who were being bullied. And it was not the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last time. And it continues today that we stand up against bullies who would try to take human beings and politicize them regardless of their background, their sexuality, their gender identity, their nationality, right? I'm not going to get too political here, but the way that I believe personally that we solve this is through political decisions to make better choices. And not just giving lip service, hold people accountable after they become elected. Because they represent all of us, they work for us. Fast forward a little bit more in my life. My sister and her wife hosted someone who was a youth, 18, 19 years old, whose family at that time, it was unsafe for them to remain with their family. And at that time, she was expressing as a lesbian and then sort of gradually started to shift and display his identity. And felt safe attending a school here in Dallas, although we were originally from North Carolina, attended a school here in Dallas that allowed him to begin to explore who he really was. And fast forward again, about 5, maybe 6 years later, I ran into him at a massive conference that Cathedral of Hope was also at, the Creating Change Conference here in Dallas. And he is a full professor now, after claiming that identity. So going from being a 20-something-year-old, sort of, unusually presenting person and kind of awkward, in my limited view of him, to becoming a professor and shepherding a group of students to attend this conference. It was truly amazing. And it is truly amazing how much, when our energy is no longer absorbed in hiding who we are, in pushing, it's like you're sitting on top of a giant beach ball, right? And you're pushing it underwater, and your whole life goal is around swimming in this pool, but trying to hold this beach ball underwater. And it's getting harder and harder to do that. That's how I equate people coming out, right? When you let go of that beach ball and it rises to the top, every single one of us has a different way of expressing that thing that we are running from, that we might be a little afraid of acknowledging. It doesn't even have to be about your gender identity or your sexual preference or your relationship preference, right? It could be anything in your life that you're running from. Maybe you've been called to the ministry and you don't want to do that because you're afraid of what might happen. I'm looking at someone in this room who I suspect that might have happened to. You're running from it. You let that go and then find just how much energy you can contribute to actually being yourself and claiming the next steps in your life and working towards something that you know is contributing to society in a positive way, as opposed to hiding whatever from society. So I say that because I understand that people sometimes they stay together and sometimes they split up. But we all know somebody who came out later in life. And I say that to kind of cue up what happened in my relationship with Michelle. Because we had been married 25 years without either one of us having any kind of a clue who she was. So I stopped and paused there because I'd like anybody to put themselves in those shoes of thinking that you're in a cisgender, heterosexual, Christian relationship with someone, and then suddenly your mate feels courageous enough, because it is a courageous disclosure. Your mate feels courageous enough to say something about who they really are. And they've been running from it as long as it became a little twinkle in their minds. But now they feel open enough to share it. And so when, it's kind of funny, when Michelle shared this with me, I had been nurturing an idea about potentially helping house queer kids the way that Angel was housed by my sister, and thinking we ought to step into that. And when I brought that up with Michelle, we were on a walk, and I said, I'm really interested in this. And I was expecting Michelle to say, oh my God, you're going to add one more thing to your plate? Are you serious? That's a big commitment. And instead, what she said was, you're so compassionate. And my spidey sense and my antenna went up. And that night we had a talk about who she really was. And when I looked at her, I was like, Michelle, have you ever even tried on women's clothing? And she said, no, I haven't. And I was like, we're about the same size. Do you want to try on some of my clothing? So, and in the back of my mind was, maybe this isn't true. Maybe it's not so. And when she put on the sparkly jeans and started looking at herself in the mirror, the hands went like this. I was like, oh my God, this is real. This is real. Okay, what do we do next? Because honestly, in the back of my mind, I always knew, or I suspected, that there was another woman in our relationship that was impacting it in some way. And, I was trying to understand where that energy was coming from. Was it a friend who had too much influence over us? Who was this woman? And it turns out that it was incredible to me that it was my absolutely